Hello! Can you believe it? It's a month later, and here I am back to tell you about the books that I've been reading over the last month. So, the first book I've read is, I finished reading Why Formula Feeding Matters by Shel. So this is a nice, easy to read little book to find out more about formula feeding and why it's important to know exactly what's going on. So she covers things like choosing and buying formula. So she talks a little bit about what's actually in formula and the legal requirements about different levels of things, which is very interesting to know. She talks about how to make up formula safely and things like responsive feeding and troubleshoots a little bit as well. So it's really interesting to know about these different things. It's important that parents know the best ways to be doing things. To be fair, I actually knew a lot of this stuff anyway because I've got an interest in the area. But for new parents, it's really good to learn exactly the right ways to do things, and also just different information you need to know. Some of the things that were interesting about what's in the formula is that there's a lot of legal requirements for what's in them. So buying a more expensive brand, it might not necessarily have any real material benefit because a lot of the levels are set by legal requirements anyway of what's actually in them. What else was interesting? It's interesting to hear about some of the alternative formulas, things like Hungry Baby and ones that are supposed to help them sleep, and why they may work, and if there's actually any real scientific basis as to their claims, and also what might be causing those issues with babies that could be solved in other ways than changing a formula or changing the way they feed. She talks about how to make up formula safely. It is really important that formula is made up safely because it's not a sterile thing, so it's very important to make it as safe as possible. I do find sometimes people are a bit preachery when they talk about that, but it's good to know all the best ways to do things. I'm not completely convinced that people are going to actually be able to live up to those standards day to day at every feed with a young baby to feed, but it is still really good to know it. It's a bit like all the safe sleep stuff. So I did co-sleeping, which I hadn't intended to do, but I just wanted to sleep. So I found out all the best ways to do it and all the official guidance on it, and I'll be honest, I did not always stick to that at all, but it was good to know it and have it in my head as something to know about. But whether you're actually going to live up to that requirement all the time with a young baby is probably unrealistic. She talks about responsive feeding, and that's really interesting. It's more about, rather than trying to give babies less big feeds with big sleeps in between, it's more about trying to give them more regular small feeds, really because this is what babies expect, and it's the way that they thrive best. And also babies, they part of the reason that they feed is not just to be full up, it's partly interaction as well and things. So that was all good. She troubleshoots some problems, and she talks about some other things, sort of like rarer problems and alternatives to formula. The woman who wrote this, she is involved with breastfeeding, so there was a bit of a breastfeeding side to it, as if you may be using formula, mixed feeding, which is important to know about because that happens a lot. And I think sometimes when people have gone into breastfeeding, they may not know as much as they want to know about formula feeding when they then find themselves mixed feeding and they've then got a young baby to look after as well. So this would be really good for anybody like that who's got to learn about this whole new area that they weren't very informed about before. And obviously if you work with babies or new mothers, it's always really good to find out what's going on, what other people are thinking, any little area of knowledge that you can expand on. So that was a great little book. Glad I read that. The other book that I read Cloud Atlas, and I actually finished it. I got all the way through it, even though it was quite a long book. I don't really know what to say about this book. it was good. I did enjoy it, and it had some really interesting ideas. Lots of ideas that I've sort of pondered on since reading it. It's one of those that sort of sticks in your mind. I wonder if that is the case, or I wonder if people do think like that. So roughly, it's got, I was trying to think how many stories it has. I think it's got about 5 or 6 even different stories in it, which I found really frustrating to begin with, because I started reading it and then suddenly it was a completely different story, which sort of annoyed me because I actually wanted to read the first story. So I was like, okay, reading this new story. And then it happened again. It was like, oh, I actually wanted to read that story now. And so I found that difficult. I understand why that method's been used, and it's very clever. But I did find it a bit frustrating at first because I just wanted to read the story that I was on. So it tells different stories about different people living at different times. So you've got someone, I think the first one's in about 1700s. And you've got one in the early 1900s, mid 1900s, and then the other one I suppose is around the noughties. And then you've got one in the future, and then one in the further future, which kind of loops back round to the first one. So it's sort of showing this cyclical thing in life. It's sort of the cycle of civilization, coming back round to the sort of savage or whatever, becoming more civilized to the point of like scariness, and then dropping and coming back around. I suppose that's not what it's what it came across to me. Talking about the individual stories, I really enjoyed all the stories. I liked the fact that they were very different, and I really liked that he'd got the real mood of each time. So he's obviously made great efforts to get the language right. And I was surprised, the one that was much further in the future, I was surprised how easy it was to adapt to that very, very strange language that was in the future, that was sort of, you could see how it had come from the past, but it was something that we're not used to. I want to say a little bit about the kind of the future with the synthetic fabricant people, because I've read so many things that talk about this scary future where either computers take over or robots or clones, and I just think, can we try and envisage a better future? I don't want that future. I don't want it, and I don't really think many people want it, really. I don't think that's what we want, and I really wish people would work to envisage a different future that isn't horrible and doesn't have some horrible controlling authoritarian government where we're all do as we're told, whether it's by violence and force or through drugging and, manipulation of desires. Can we just try and envisage a better future and work towards that? That sort of came through to me in the book. I don't want the future that's in the book, and I'd like to make efforts not to go there. It was a really good book. It was very clever, very cleverly written, and I did enjoy it, apart from the fact that I did find it a bit frustrating to begin with, that it was disjointed. Right, so that's that book. That was very good. What I'm reading now, I'm reading The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin by David Nobbs. Oh, Cloud Atlas was by David Mitchell as well, by the way, which I didn't say. And he seems like a very interesting person. I've looked him up a little bit, and I think I would be interested to read some more of his books. I mean, it was an excellently written book. I can't fault it at all on the writing. Very, very good. So I'm reading that. This is really light and easy and breezy to read. If you've watched the TV series, you'll have an idea what that's about. After that, I'm going to read Dumbing Us Down, which I read years ago when I was first looking into homeschooling. I'm going to go over that again. And the other thing I've been reading the proof of my own book, which I'm sure everybody is very excited to look out for. So that's it. I'll see you next month when I will hopefully be able to tell you about these books. Okay? Thank you.